Hey friends, my name is Eric, and welcome to Skeptics and Scoundrels. In this episode, we're looking at a Christian apologist's response to a super chat of mine in a live stream on Godless Engineer's channel. Yeah, a link to that live stream is down below in the video's description, along with any other links to any other videos where I might have borrowed footage, including this guy. So this dude's name is Joe Ensley, whom I will be calling Joe for short. According to Joe's personal website, he's a Christian, college-educated pastor, author of a book available on Amazon, and regularly posts recordings of his sermons on his podcast channel. He appeared on Godless Engineer's live stream about a month ago, shortly after Godless Engineer had done a response to a video of his from his channel. But before we talk about what led up to this live stream and analysis itself, I've got a few good things to say about Joe. First off, Joe has an upbeat attitude and friendly demeanor. He's a clear and energetic speaker and is easy to listen to. Definitely a big difference compared to some of the more preachy and boring monotone speakers I've had to suffer through in the past. Secondly, after Godless Engineer's spirited and savage rebuttal of Joe's video, Joe had the courage and composure to appear on Godless Engineer's channel, on a live stream at that, and then proceeded to share in a friendly and amicable discussion with him. That's classy, and I respect that. Thirdly, and Godless Engineer already mentioned this, but I've got to mention it too, Joe, props for that beard, man. I could never hope to grow something like that. I'm definitely a little jealous. You could easily nest a family of endangered birds in that thing.
Oh my God, they're babies.
So this started when Joe posted a video on his YouTube channel where he clearly demonstrated that he has some misconceptions about atheists.
First of all, as I like to tell people, the A in atheist stands for angry. Here's the thing. No one doesn't believe there's a God. The fact that you're mad at something, the fact that you're against something is actually evidence that it exists. They wouldn't be talking about this if it wasn't real, so that's a really fun fact to start your day off with, the reason they're mad about it. What they're essentially trying to do is get back at God for not doing things the way they want. But atheists are angry at God for not doing things the way they want them done. And they usually just kind of blow that off or whatever. And that's fine. That's their issue. Every atheist deep down actually believes two things. They know they have an eternal destination, and they know they are guilty before God. Number one, you need to know they actually believe God exists, and that's something you need to keep in your back pocket. They're mad at God. Look for the hurt. That if you can minister to them and their hurt and their need and their anger, that's actually going to be a better place to start before trying to logically convince them of constructs they're not capable of understanding because they're so emotionally involved in their hurt and their pain.
These were all said unironically, and I'm not here to rebut these claims. GE already did that, and I've got other fish to fry. But man, Joe, if you paint a whole group of people with such a broad brush, you're going to come across as dishonest, scared, and incapable of acknowledging nuance in other people different than you. Not to mention piss off people you're trying to save. This is embarrassing, and it's not a good look. Now, naturally, Godless Engineer took exception to these statements and created a whole video response to which he tackled the nitty-gritty of Joe's claims. This quickly caught Joe's attention, so he reached out to Godless Engineer, and they both agreed to a one-on-one live stream conversation on Godless Engineer's channel. At the beginning of this interaction, Joe thanked Godless Engineer for the feedback and for tearing apart his statements.
And obviously the video that you found was me telling Christians how to witness to someone such as yourself, which was, I really actually appreciated how you tore it apart. And you did a great job tearing it apart. And that's why I was like, well, yikes.
From that point, the conversation flowed through a few topics: purpose of life, Pascal's wager, historicity of Jesus, faith, creationism versus evolution, until they broached the oh-so-fun quagmire of biblical morality.
It's like God is the standard of morality. We see it pop up everywhere. There's actually a pretty generalized collective consensus on a general level. Like most people think killing people is wrong, stuff like that. So where's our morality coming from if there is no God? So yeah.
And this eventually led to a conversation around Numbers chapter 31, verses 17 and 18, where God commanded Moses and the Israelites to go and slaughter the neighboring Midianites with the explicit command to kill all the men, kill all the women, kill all the male children, kill all the non-virgin girls, and then keep the remaining virgin girls for themselves.
Like you claimed, the Godless Engineer is morally superior to God. And I would love to hear how you make that work. So I thought that was a great statement. I'd love to touch on that with you for a minute.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I could just point out one chapter in the Old Testament that proves it. Numbers 31.
Numbers 31.
Yeah, specifically.
So what are we looking at for Numbers 31?
It's specifically located in verses 17 and 18. Basically what happens is that God commands Moses to go into the Midianite culture and kill everybody.
Vengeance on Midian is the name of the chapter. So yeah, I got you.
Yeah. So they go into the Midianites, they kill everybody, all the men, all the warring men, all the men that would be fighting back, but also the women and all of the small boys. And then they captured the prepubescent girls who haven't known the touch of a man to be used in sexual slavery.
Now, while Joe disagreed with the sexual slaves inference, he did very much agree to the bit regarding the killing of everyone except the virgins.
First of all, I'm not going to concede that they were bringing in all the girls as sexual slaves. I believe they were bringing them in for something else. But the killing of everyone, I will concede that because that is exactly what Numbers 31 says.
And finally, the discussion reached the point where I dropped Joe a super chat to ask him a question.
Eric again says, could God accomplish 100% of his goals with zero killing or murder? Could his goals have been satisfied without the execution of children?
Before we go into his response, I want to say that in retrospect, since the two questions are both basically the same ask, I should have dropped the first question for brevity's sake. I think the second question adequately handled the inquiry on its own, or better yet, simply ask half of both questions together as, could God accomplish 100% of his goals without the execution of children? But this was an off-the-cuff question on a live stream chat, and it is what it is. So a lesson learned for next time. So I formulated these two questions very purposefully. All they require is a simple yes, no, or I don't know response. Neither question is loaded with unfounded assumptions, and I feel they were both clear and concise. Simple, right? Well, to my amazement and amusement, these questions immediately short-circuited his brain.
Obviously not. God chose to use those devices to display his glory and accomplish his goals. So could God? I don't know. You'll have to ask him yourself. But what he chose to do, the best way for him to do that in our fallen state, recognizing that sin and death, like even the fact that those things are in the equation as a result of man's sin, not God's original perfect garden, recognizing that we bear some responsibility in sin and death and atrocities, God clearly decided that this was the best way to accomplish his goals, whatever his goals were at those times. So no, God couldn't do that. Maybe he couldn't, but he chose to do it this way.
Okay.
Wow, that was a lot of words for a simple yes, no, I don't know question. Let's walk through it and try to sort this mess out. I didn't really do that. That was done on the computer and post-production, and it's like all technical.
Could his goals have been satisfied without the execution of children?
Obviously not.
Great. Simple answer. It's clear. It's concise. It's a no. But it does raise some questions about God's ability. Namely, if God could obviously not satisfy his goals without commanding the Israelites to slaughter the Midianites and their children, then why not? Joe, this question raises some troubling implications about this God of yours. Troubling for you, that is, not for me. Despite what you think, I don't believe in the guy. So if God could obviously not satisfy his goals without killing children, that breaks us down into two categories: no free will and free will. One possibility is that God simply lacked the free will to choose otherwise, and that's why he could obviously not avoid the execution of children. In which case, he's limited in or lacks agency. And that means there's an aspect of himself that he himself cannot change or even has control over, which means he's not all powerful. And under the free will path, it's also fairly simple. God couldn't do it, but he had the free will to do it. That means something prevented him from avoiding the slaughtering of children. What was it? Did he lack the power to actualize a better course of action, in which case he's not all powerful? Did he lack the knowledge to devise a better plan, in which case he's not all knowing? Did he lack motivation? He just didn't want to? He was lazy? In which case, he's not benevolent. Or is it something else that's not mentioned here? Something else prevented him from taking a better course of action. Something locked him out of all the other non-child killing options. And the only subset of options available to him all involved the killing of children. In which case, he was at the mercy of circumstance, which means he's not all-powerful. It's a shame that Joe or his Bible doesn't address these issues.
God chose to use those devices to display his glory and accomplish his goals.
Okay, wait, so now God did choose to do this? If God did choose to do this, then that means he could have chosen otherwise. So we're now at a yes answer on this question. And not only that, God chose to use these devices on purpose. This also raises some issues. So now that we're in the yes category, that means God has free will because he could have chosen otherwise, which leaves us two possibilities. Either he did or did not want to choose otherwise. If he did not want to choose otherwise, then that means he chose to execute children despite having other options, which would mean he wanted children executed? For what? The funsies? Some requirement? Some need? Oh, for morally sufficient reasons, as some Christians would say. Of course, the execution of children was done for morally sufficient reasons. Duh. Oh, but wait, this just kicks the can because God could have avoided execution of children in a way that accommodated those morally sufficient reasons, right? If no, then we're back to him not being all-powerful or all-knowing again. And if yes, and he could have, then he executed children when it could have been avoided. And now he's not benevolent. Morally sufficient reasons isn't a good answer here because God should be able to meet those morally sufficient reasons by any manner or means of his, with that big brain and all. And that leaves the last path. God could do it. He had the power, knowledge, and will, and he wanted to do it. But children died anyway. Why? Nothing prevented him from avoiding killing children. He would still reach his goals, and he should have wanted to not kill children. But it happened anyway. I see this as a direct contradiction to the nature of God Joe claims exists. If only we had a name for this, if only some past philosophers had already presented this problem of evil, we wouldn't have to be talking about it now.
So could God? I don't know. You'll have to ask him yourself.
Okay, I don't know. That's a totally fair answer, and I think it's your most honest one thus far. But it's literally the last possible answer you could have given. Oh my God, you gave me all three answers in less than 10 seconds. And you want me to ask God myself? Contrary to your ignorant belief, I don't believe he exists. And you're the pastor. You're supposed to convince me he exists. If anyone could just ask God for anything and get an answer, then what are you here for?
But what he chose to do, the best way for him to do that in our fallen state, recognizing that sin and death, like even the fact that those things are in the equation as a result of man's sin, not God's original perfect garden, recognizing that we bear some responsibility in sin and death and atrocities, God clearly decided that this was the best way to accomplish his goals, whatever his goals were at those times.
Oh my God. I think my brain just spun on my skull. Let's break this down.
But what he chose to do,
God chose what to do. So now we're back to the yes, he had a choice. And therefore, he had the ability to choose otherwise and accomplish his goals without slaughtering children. But he didn't.
The best way for him to do that in our fallen state.
So now Joe is saying that this is the best way to do this under the given conditions, which would mean that God could not find a better way. So now we're at no again. God couldn't have accomplished his goals without the killing of children, since all other possible ways to accomplish his goals required the killing of children. So now we're back to not all-powerful or all-knowing. Why do I say all-knowing on this one? Because I found a way to accomplish God's goals here without murdering children. All God had to do was snap his fingers, teleport the Midianites, along with their village, their belongings, and everything needed for survival to an isolated part of the earth. And once that's done, remove their ability to reproduce. Problem solved. The Midianites are removed from the equation, and they are no longer a threat, real or not, to the Israelites. The leftover land is open and ready for the taking. No children, or anyone for that matter, had to be murdered. No virgin girls had to be kept as trophies. The Midianites could live out their lives in peace and die naturally. And with regard to the Israelite army, it's certainly better to not have an army accustomed to killing children and taking virgin trophies. And the cherry on top, it's an amazing story for God's future Bible. Certainly more compelling than sending a bunch of marauding savages to raise a village, murder the inhabitants, and keep the virgin for themselves, because that's what everyone else back then was doing. So there you go, Joe. I formulated a better plan than your God did, with no killing and a better outcome for everyone across the board. No, please, God, you're welcome. Anyway, where were we? All right.
Recognizing that sin and death, like even the fact that those things are in the equation as a result of man's sin, not God's original perfect garden.
So what Joe is basically saying here is we are so bad and so sinful that God could not have handled this situation any different. Mankind, in our debauchery, shackled God to these terrible options. So not only does that put us back into the no camp, but it now also means that man can compel God to take actions he normally wouldn't, or lock him out of actions that he normally would, and God is unable to work around this? So now he's not all-powerful and all-knowing yet again.
Recognizing that we bear some responsibility in sin and death and atrocities, God clearly decided that this was the best way to accomplish his goals, whatever his goals were at those times.
So here Joe is admitting that executing children is an atrocity, right? For the sake of your humanity, Joe, I really hope so. And on top of that, if we humans bear some responsibility for sin, death, and atrocities, some responsibility, then your God bears the rest. Responsibility for sin, death, and atrocities, because he's the source of it. He's the source of everything, right? And you might have missed it, but Joe said God clearly decided. So that puts us back into yes.
So no, God couldn't do that.
Oh, we're back to no again.
Maybe he couldn't.
Oh, that's I don't know again. We're back into I don't know again territory.
But he chose to do it this way.
Jesus Christ, he chose? Then that means it's a yes.
Okay.
Whew. Okay. All right. We're through that. All right. So what's the final score? Sweet Buddha. So when I first heard Joe give his answer, I knew it was a mess. But now that I've actually spent a few hours sorting through his response and writing the script, man, I more fully appreciate the concept of Brandolini's law. I mean, I already knew how the law was true, but man, after sifting through that, I now understand how that law is true. So time to wrap this up. I've drawn a few conclusions from this interaction, and keep in mind, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a Jedi, unfortunately. I can't read minds. So take my opinions here as just that, opinions. First off, it's obvious that Joe has never before considered such a simple question like, could God have accomplished his goals without the killing of children? He had nothing approaching a coherent answer. And as he did try to work towards the answer while giving the answer, you could see his mind dashing back and forth between yes and no, like a baseball player caught in a pickle. Secondly, I find it telling how Joe didn't give the question even a moment of consideration or thought before he rushed into the answer. Now, granted, this could have been nervousness from being on a live chat. I mean, a majority of the audience is there. They hold opinions that are at odds with his own, naturally putting him in a defensive position, having to think on his feet and all. I can totally understand that. If I was in that position, I would feel the same exact way. But Joe, a simple moment of consideration followed by an I don't know would have been fine. And I think that this is a product of him being a college-educated pastor of, I'm assuming, a church. He likely views himself as looked up to and followed by his parishioners. After all, he was called by God to be the channel for all of their spiritual guidance and answers. So I imagine he's normally in a position of answering questions from his parishioners with speed, confidence, bravado. But when faced with a single question from a random and average non-believer, a question that your average Christ-accepting church-going sheep would almost never ask, he was utterly unprepared and ill-equipped to address it. I mean, one could argue that he was just following Mark 13:11, where it says to, do not worry beforehand about what to say. Just say whatever is given you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit. And I'll be honest, if this is the Holy Spirit speaking, I'm not impressed. So I'd like to conclude with some additional comments on some of his statements in his later interactions with Godless Engineer.
And I will say, first of all, like lots of your comments about, well, okay, this is a really crappy move. He's kind of being a jerk here. I was kind of like, yeah, if I heard me and I walked up to someone and I was like, I know what you believe better than you, that's a sucky way to start a conversation.
So here he admits that he can be empathetic in regard to somebody being approached by a stranger and told, I know what you're thinking better than you do. Great. Joe, you're able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. That's a great quality to have. But why aren't you able to extend that empathy to also include people who say, I really don't believe in a God, and that's the truth?
So obviously I come at it from a biblical perspective, and I believe, God's word has said that everyone believes this. So I'm coming at it from that worldview, but I would never start a conversation that way.
Oh, right. Your holy book tells you to do otherwise. The same holy book that commands people to go execute children. Got it.
Humanistically, my perspective, let them live a little longer. That makes sense, but I'm not God. I don't get to make that call.
He also admits that he has a differing opinion from God with regard to slaughtering villages, but he knowingly suppresses his humanistic and moral alignment even when his moral code comes in conflict with said God's commands.
This is like my son when he breaks down his Legos. Would it have better for those Legos to lived a little longer on his desk? I don't know, but he made the Legos. He decided to break them down and build something else up. That's the Lego maker's call. And in this situation, this is God's call because it's his creation. These are his pots of clay, and he made that decision, not me.
He rationalizes this with a bizarre comparison of living, breathing people compared to Lego bricks. Yikes. So, Joe, let me ask you. It's easy to look at murdered children in a historical tale in a dusty book and make this rationalization. But what if it was your own kids? What if God commanded your kids to be executed? Except the daughters, of course. Would you stick with your convictions here? Now, I think he'd likely answer, oh, well, God would never command me to do something like that because...
I like that I'm in the age of grace where people do get to live even when they haven't worshiped God and they have an opportunity to repent. I think I'm really glad I was born in the New Testament. I'm not going to lie. That's a bloody awful scene.
The age of grace. This is a new concept to me as it wasn't taught in my church. And I'm guessing what you mean by the age of grace, or at least part of it, is that we are now in an era where God no longer commands such heinous things as butchering children. But that does raise the question, what would you do if you weren't in the age of grace? What if you were one of those Israelites back then, and Moses came down and said, hey guys, God commands us to go to this village and kill everyone, except the virgin girls, which, hey, you can keep. What would you do? Would you say to yourself, well, this goes against my humanity, but God commands it, so I've got to do it. And then you would grab your sword and go join the party? Joe, would you cut your way into a family's home, killing the father, the mother, the son, walking over to the baby's crib, checking the baby's sex, and then upon discovering that it's a male, stick your sword through its throat? And then afterwards turn to the only survivor, a little girl, grab her by the wrist, and then pull her to the wagon to join the others, to be later used for yourself? I'm really curious what your answer to this would be. Would you do it or not? I hope not. Oh, now, Eric, that's a terrible story to paint. Those are terrible questions to ask. But it's not. It's in your Bible. This is what your God supposedly commanded. This is what you're defending and calling moral. Joe, I really do hope that you consider these questions carefully. Because honestly, from what I've seen of you so far, you strike me as a really swell guy. You would be fun to sit down and have a beer with and just shoot the shit. But you do need to sit down and really think about this, because your answer to my question was a confused, contradiction-riddled mess. You attempted to defend and rationalize child slaughter, and then you expressed gratitude that you weren't faced with those choices. You didn't have to participate in those atrocities. And you did that in hopes that this would make you not look as bad? I sincerely ask you to think about this. All right, friends, that's it for this one. You know, when I sat down to work on this episode, I had no idea this would turn into a 30-minute video, but this was a fun project and I enjoyed researching and writing it. I learned a lot throughout, and I hope you enjoyed it and will come back for more. Feel free to leave me a comment down below. Did I miss something? Make a blatant error? Could I have made any improvements? Let me know. Also, if you'd like to promote the growth of this channel, go ahead and like this video and subscribe. I've got lots more videos I plan to create, and the channel growth is certainly encouraging. Speaking of which, I plan for my next video to tackle the subject of deconversion from religion. So keep an eye out for that within the next couple of weeks. Until then, have a good new year. See ya.